You may believe your deepest projection is losing power because you finally understand it. You can name the wound. You can describe the pattern. You can explain why this particular person became so important, so threatening, so magnetic, or so impossible to forget. But insight alone does not mean the projection has weakened. Sometimes insight becomes another hiding place, a more sophisticated way to remain attached while convincing yourself that you have moved on. Carl Jung spent decades studying this exact deception. He saw that the psyche does not withdraw a projection simply because you recognize it intellectually. A projection loses its power only when the emotional energy you placed outside yourself begins to return. Until then, you may know precisely what is happening and still feel controlled by it. That control can look like love. It can look like hatred. It can look like moral certainty, obsessive curiosity, resentment, admiration, jealousy, or the need to be understood by one specific person. The emotional tone changes, but the mechanism remains the same. Something inside you has been placed onto someone outside you, and your inner life now seems to depend on what that person does next. You may call it chemistry. You may call it betrayal. You may call it intuition. You may even call it fate. Yet the intensity often comes from a hidden psychic equation. This person carries a quality you have not fully claimed, a wound you have not fully grieved, or a possibility you have not yet allowed yourself to become. The projection is deepest when the person no longer appears as a whole human being. They become a symbol. They become the one who can finally choose you, expose you, rescue you, validate you, humiliate you, abandon you, or prove that your worst fear was true. The real person may still be present, but your psyche is no longer relating only to them. It is relating to an image. Jung called projection an unconscious, automatic process. You do not deliberately decide to place your rejected weakness, forbidden desire, unlived strength, or unhealed fear onto someone else. The psyche does it before reflection. It creates a convincing outer drama so that you do not have to face an inner conflict directly. This is why projection feels so real. It is not fake emotion. The feeling is genuine. The interpretation may be distorted, but the energy is yours. Your body responds because something psychologically important is happening, even when the story you tell about the other person is incomplete. A woman sees a message appear on her phone and leaves it unopened for 20 minutes. She tells herself that she is calm, yet she checks the screen 3 times while making tea. When she finally reads the message, one ordinary sentence determines the emotional atmosphere of her entire evening. She is not only responding to him, she is responding to the meaning her psyche has placed inside him. When a projection begins to weaken, the outer person does not necessarily disappear. The relationship may continue. The conflict may remain unresolved. The memory may still return. What changes is the location of authority. The other person gradually stops holding the key to an inner room that was always yours. That shift is rarely dramatic. It often arrives through small changes that are easy to miss. You may still think about the person, but the thought no longer reorganizes your entire day. You may still feel pain, but the pain becomes specific instead of infinite. You may still want an answer, but you no longer believe the answer will complete you. The projection begins to lose power when you no longer feel compelled to correct the other person's image of you. This compulsion is one of the most hidden forms of bondage. You tell yourself that you only want fairness. You want them to understand what really happened. You want them to see your intentions, your loyalty, your sensitivity, your strength, or the harm they caused. Yet beneath the wish for accuracy is often a deeper demand. They must see you correctly. so that you can feel real. Jung understood that projection creates a closed circuit. You do not merely perceive the other person through an unconscious image. You also begin to depend on their reaction to confirm your own identity. If they misread you, reject you, or reduce you to a role, the injury feels larger than the immediate event, because it activates the part of you that still needs external recognition to authorize your existence. A man drafts a long message after an argument and reads it 6 times before sending. He removes one sentence, adds it back, then changes the final paragraph so he will not sound needy. What he wants is not simply to communicate. He wants the other person to admit that he is not the selfish man she believes him to be. When the projection weakens, you may still clarify yourself once. You may still defend a boundary. You may still correct a lie when the consequences matter. But you stop trying to enter another person's mind and rearrange the furniture. You stop believing that peace will arrive when their private version of you becomes more flattering. This does not mean you become indifferent to being misunderstood. It means you become less willing to abandon yourself in order to control the misunderstanding. You recognize that someone can hold an incomplete image of you without possessing the truth of you. The emotional change can feel almost anticlimactic. You notice that you could send another message, explain one more detail, produce more evidence, or make one final argument. Then you do not. Not because you have nothing to say, but because your identity is no longer waiting for their permission to exist. What you once called unfinished business may have been the psyche's attempt to force self-recognition through another person's eyes. When that need loosens, silence stops feeling like defeat. The projection begins to lose power when the emotional charge becomes proportionate to what actually happened. Projection magnifies. It takes a delayed reply and turns it into abandonment. It takes criticism and turns it into annihilation. It takes admiration and turns it into destiny. It takes attraction and turns it into proof that the unlived life has finally arrived in human form. Jung described complexes as emotionally charged clusters of memory, belief, image, and bodily response. When a complex is activated, you do not simply remember the past. You temporarily become organized by it. Your perception narrows. Your body prepares for an old event while your mind insists it is responding only to the present one. This is why your reactions may have seemed too large, even when your pain was valid. The present moment was carrying more than itself. It had become a doorway through which older fear, humiliation, longing, and helplessness entered all at once. A woman hears her colleague receive praise in a meeting. She smiles, writes one line in her notebook, and says nothing for the rest of the hour. Later, she replays the manager's words while washing a cup that is already clean. The praise was not the whole wound. It touched the life she believed she had been denied. As the projection weakens, the body begins to distinguish then from now. You may feel disappointed without collapsing into worthlessness. You may feel attracted without constructing a future. You may feel anger without needing to turn the other person into a monster. You may feel grief without treating it as evidence that you lost the only possible source of love. This proportionality does not make the feeling small. It makes the feeling accurate. A specific injury can finally be mourned because it is no longer fused with every injury that came before it. You may notice that your body recovers more quickly. The tightness in your chest passes without demanding a story. The urge to check, rehearse, predict, and interpret loses some of its command. The person still matters, but the nervous system no longer treats every movement they make as a verdict on your survival. What you have been calling emotional numbness may actually be the return of psychological scale. The feeling is no longer required to carry your entire history. The projection begins to lose power when you can recognize the projected quality as part of yourself. This is the turning point most people avoid. It is easier to believe that the other person possesses something extraordinary than to admit that your fascination is pointing toward an unlived capacity within you. It is easier to condemn their arrogance than to confront your own buried authority. It is easier to worship their freedom than to face how often you have betrayed your own desire. Jung insisted that projection ends through withdrawal. But withdrawal does not mean simply cutting contact. It means taking back the psychological content you placed outside yourself. You begin to ask what the person represents, what quality they carry in your imagination, and why your psyche decided that this quality belonged to them but not to you. Sometimes you project the shadow, the traits you reject because they conflict with your preferred self-image. You see selfishness everywhere because you cannot admit your own need. You see manipulation because you do not trust your own influence. You see weakness because dependency in yourself has been buried under competence. Sometimes you project gold. You see confidence, creativity, sensuality, discipline, spiritual depth, or courage, as if another person owns the only available supply. Your admiration becomes painful because it contains a message you have not yet accepted. The quality that moves you is psychologically meaningful because some version of it is seeking life through you. A quiet employee watches a colleague challenge an unfair decision. He calls her dramatic when speaking to another coworker, yet he checks the meeting notes again that evening. The sentence she said keeps returning to him. What disturbs him is not only her boldness, it is the voice in himself that he has trained not to use. When the projection weakens, your description of the other person becomes less absolute. They are no longer pure courage, pure cruelty, pure beauty, pure selfishness, or pure wisdom. You see the trait in them, but you also begin to locate its roots, distortions, and possibilities within yourself. This recognition can be humiliating. It removes the comfort of innocence. You can no longer organize the story around the belief that they carry all the darkness while you carry all the awareness, or that they carry all the vitality while you remain only the deprived observer. Yet this humiliation is fertile. It returns choice to you. Once the quality becomes yours to confront, you no longer need to chase it, punish it, or worship it in another person. What you once experienced as their unbearable power may have been your own unlived life appearing at a distance. The projection begins to lose power when your image of the person becomes more ordinary. At the height of projection, the person seems psychologically enormous. Their smallest gesture feels loaded with meaning. Their approval creates expansion. Their distance creates collapse. Their contradictions become mysteries you must solve rather than ordinary evidence that they are a divided human being. Jung saw that the archetypal image can flood a personal relationship with transpersonal intensity. The beloved becomes the soul image. The rival becomes the shadow. The authority figure becomes the judging father. The wounded person becomes the child you must rescue. Once an archetype takes over, the individual disappears behind the role your psyche needs them to play. This is why facts often fail to break the attachment. You may know that the person is inconsistent, unavailable, limited, or incompatible. You may have watched the same pattern repeat. Yet the archetypal charge makes each new encounter feel like an exception, a clue, or a final chance for transformation. A man passes the cafe where he once met someone he cannot forget. He slows down, looks through the window, and imagines how the conversation might unfold if she were inside. Then he notices a chipped table, a tired waiter, and two strangers arguing quietly over a bill. For the first time, the place is only a cafe again. Ordinariness is not contempt. It is not the defensive act of reducing someone so you can feel superior. It is the recovery of proportion. You begin to see that the person has habits, fears, blind spots, appetites, defenses, and limitations that do not exist solely in relation to you. They may still be beautiful. They may still have hurt you. They may still possess qualities you deeply value, but they stop appearing as the single doorway through which your life must pass. You may even feel grief when this happens. The inner figure was larger than the human being. It carried possibility, danger, redemption, and meaning. As it dissolves, the world can briefly feel less enchanted. That grief deserves respect. You are not merely letting go of a person. You are relinquishing a private mythology in which their next choice could redeem your past. The projection begins to lose power when your energy returns to the life directly in front of you. Projection consumes libido, the psychic energy Jung understood as broader than sexuality. It includes attention, imagination, motivation, curiosity, and the power to invest in life. When this energy is trapped in another person, you may appear functional, while inwardly living in suspension. You complete tasks, answer messages, make plans, and speak to people. Yet a portion of your mind remains oriented toward the projected figure. You wonder what they are doing. You rehearse what you would say. You monitor signs. You compare new people to them. You build imaginary conversations that produce no actual change. As the projection weakens, this energy does not vanish. It returns. At first, it may return as restlessness, because you no longer have the familiar drama to organize your attention. The empty space can feel uncomfortable. You may mistake the absence of obsession for the absence of meaning. A woman deletes a draft she has kept for months. She closes the document, stands in the kitchen, and notices the basil plant has grown toward the window. That afternoon, she signs up for a course she had postponed twice. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet something in her life has started moving again. The returning energy may show itself through simple acts. You become interested in your own morning. You finish a task without imagining whether the person would approve. You make a decision that is not designed to provoke, impress, punish, or be noticed. You begin to want things that have no connection to the old story. This is one of the most reliable signs because projection always narrows life around its object. When the power returns to you, the field widens. Other relationships regain texture. Work becomes less mechanical. Creativity returns without needing to become a message. Your body becomes a place to inhabit rather than a signal to display. You may still remember the person. The memory may still carry tenderness or anger, but it no longer functions as the secret center of your choices. What you once called losing the connection may actually be the psyche restoring your capacity to connect with life itself. These changes can tempt you to declare the process finished. You no longer send the message. Your body calms more quickly. You see the trait in yourself. The person appears more ordinary. Your attention returns to your own life. Yet the deepest cost has not appeared until you face what the projection was protecting you from. The projection gave you more than pain. It gave you an identity. It allowed you to be the one who was waiting, the one who was betrayed, the one who understood, the one who could save them, the one who was never chosen, the one who loved more deeply, or the one who saw what everyone else missed. Even suffering can become a stable position when it explains who you are. Jung warned that consciousness carries responsibility. Once you recognize the projection, you lose some of the innocence that allowed you to blame the whole emotional drama on the other person. You may still hold them accountable for real behavior, but you must also confront your participation in the psychic structure that made them larger than life. This is the shadow beneath the shadow. You may have used the projection to postpone a decision. As long as they were the obstacle, you did not have to risk becoming visible. As long as they were the lost possibility, you did not have to build a new one. As long as they carried the courage, cruelty, freedom, or desire, you did not have to discover what those forces would demand from you. The cost of withdrawing the projection is that your life becomes yours again. That sounds liberating until you recognize what ownership requires. You can no longer wait for closure before beginning. You can no longer use their confusion as permission to remain confused. You can no longer treat your wound as a permanent exemption from choice. You may also have to grieve the fantasy that the relationship could have repaired an older injury. Perhaps being chosen by this person would have seemed to reverse every earlier rejection. Perhaps defeating them would have seemed to erase the humiliation they awakened. Perhaps receiving their apology would have seemed to prove that your pain had finally been witnessed by the right authority. But no present person can travel backward and become the parent, protector, witness, or rescuer who was absent when the original wound formed. They can offer love, they can cause harm, they can take responsibility, they can change. What they cannot do is rewrite the psychic conditions under which you first learned to abandon yourself. Accepting this can feel cruel. It removes the final imagined bargain. The psyche has to stop negotiating with the past through a person in the present. You may discover that you do not only miss them, you miss who you were allowed to be in relation to them. You miss the intensity, the hope, the moral certainty, the ache, or the sense that your life contained a hidden plot. Without the projection, you must meet yourself without the drama that once made everything feel significant. This is where many people recreate the pattern. They find a new person, a new enemy, a new teacher, a new unavailable love, or a new authority to resist. The face changes, but the inner arrangement remains untouched. Psychic energy is placed outside again because inward responsibility feels too exposed. Your task is not to become suspicious of every strong feeling. Intensity is not automatically projection. Love is not automatically illusion. Anger is not automatically displacement. The question is whether the feeling allows you to perceive the other person more clearly, or whether it requires them to carry a role your psyche cannot yet bear to own. A real relationship becomes more real as projection withdraws. You can love without worship. You can disagree without demonizing. You can leave without turning the other person into proof that intimacy is impossible. You can stay without demanding that they complete the unfinished architecture of yourself. There is something you are allowed to stop doing now. You are allowed to stop collecting evidence for a case your body has already understood. You are allowed to stop translating every silence, every glance, every delay, and every change in tone. You are allowed to stop making the other person's inner world your full-time occupation. You are allowed to stop proving that your pain was real. Reality does not become more valid because the person who caused the wound finally agrees with your description. Their recognition may matter, but it is not the source of truth. You are allowed to stop reducing yourself to the role you played in the projection. You are more than the rejected one. You are more than the rescuer. You are more than the betrayed one. You are more than the person who saw their potential and waited for them to see it too. Jung's work on individuation was never a promise that consciousness would remove pain. It was a demand that you become less divided in relation to it. The feeling can remain, but it no longer has to govern from the unconscious. The memory can remain, but it no longer has to dictate the future. You do not have to force yourself to feel nothing. Forced indifference is often projection turned inside out. The person still controls you, only now through the effort required to prove they do not matter. You can let the feeling become quieter at its own pace. You can let disappointment remain disappointment. You can let attraction remain attraction. You can let grief remain grief. None of these feelings must become a prophecy. The deepest projection loses power when you no longer need the other person to become different in order for you to return to yourself. This is the reversal you may not have expected. You thought freedom would arrive when you finally understood them, when they apologized, when they came back, when they failed publicly, when they admitted your value, or when you stopped caring completely. But freedom begins earlier. It begins when their role in your inner life becomes visible enough that you can reclaim what was hidden inside it. You may still choose distance. You may still ask for repair. You may still end the relationship. You may still love them. Integration does not prescribe the outer decision. It changes the psychic position from which the decision is made. Then, the unanswered message is only an unanswered message. The remembered face is only a remembered face. The quality you admired becomes a life you can practice. The quality you condemned becomes a shadow you can examine. The future you imagined becomes energy available for a future you can actually build. The accusation at the beginning was not that you lacked insight. It was that insight may have become another way to remain attached. Now you can see the difference. Understanding explains the projection. Reclaiming your energy transforms it. Your freedom is not proven by never thinking of them again. It is proven when the thought no longer removes you from your own life. If this resonates, subscribe to The Waking Shadow, where you explore Jung's psychology for the path of individuation. Watch the video on your screen now to understand what happens when the shadow stops asking for recognition and begins asking for integration.